Your dog doesn't just recognize your face. A crow you fed once 3 years ago still knows exactly which human you are. A dolphin you swam with on vacation in 2019 has not forgotten you. An elephant that saw you once, briefly from a distance, filed you, specifically, with enough detail to retrieve that file years later and act on it. The question most people ask is whether animals are smart. That's the wrong question. The right question is how much of you they're actually carrying around. And the answer, when you look at what the research actually shows, is going to make you think differently about every animal that has ever looked at you. Start with what recognition actually requires. Not just sight, not just smell, not pattern matching. True individual recognition, the ability to distinguish one specific being from all others of the same type and maintain that distinction across time, requires something the scientific community spent decades insisting was uniquely human. A mental model of another individual. A stored representation specific enough to survive months or years of absence and still fire accurately when that individual reappears. That is not a simple cognitive feat. It requires memory architecture that most of the scientific community assumed animals didn't have. The data changed that assumption completely. In 2011, researchers at the University of Exeter published findings on individual recognition in wild robins. Not robins that had been trained. Wild birds living wild lives in natural territory. The researchers used human volunteers who visited the same locations repeatedly. What they found was that individual robins not only recognized specific human faces, but maintained those recognitions across the entire winter season. Months of irregular contact, changing weather, changing clothing. The birds weren't tracking the coat. They weren't tracking the location. They were tracking the face. The specific face. Yours if you had been the one feeding them. And they remembered it longer than most people remember a stranger they met at a party last month. But face recognition is only the beginning, because what the crow research revealed goes somewhere the robin data doesn't reach. John Marzluff at the University of Washington has spent years inside one of the most uncomfortable findings in modern behavioral science. Crows don't just remember your face. They build a dossier on you. In controlled studies, volunteers wore specific rubber masks while interacting with crows in ways that ranged from neutral to threatening. The crows responded to the threatening mask with alarm calls and evasive behavior. Expected. What wasn't expected was what came next. The same masked volunteers returned to the same areas weeks later, months later. The crows that had been present for the original encounter still scolded the mask, still mobbed it, still treated it as a known, specific, documented threat. 5 years later, same response. But the part that changes everything is what happened with the crows that weren't there. Young birds. Birds that hadn't been born when the original encounter occurred. They also scolded the mask, not because they had seen anything threatening, because an older crow that remembered you, that had filed you, specifically under dangerous, had told them. Your reputation traveled through the flock without you. You became a known quantity to animals that had never seen you. A file in a social network you didn't know existed, maintained by animals you had never met, updated and distributed across years without your knowledge or participation. Think about what that means for a moment. There are crows alive right now in cities across the United States that know specific things about specific humans they have never personally encountered. The knowledge was inherited. The file was passed down. You have a reputation in the crow world and you almost certainly don't know what it says. Elephants operate on a different scale entirely. In Amboseli National Park in Kenya, researcher McComb documented something that took years to fully understand. Elephants were able to identify individual humans not just by sight but by voice and smell, and they maintained these identifications across gaps of years. More specifically, they maintained the behavioral implications of those identifications. An elephant that had a negative encounter with a specific human didn't just remember the face. It retained the specific threat classification associated with that individual and applied it every time that individual appeared, regardless of whether that individual was doing anything threatening at the moment of re-encounter. You scared an elephant once. 5 years later, you walk into view doing nothing threatening at all. The elephant knows it's you. It knows what you did. It has been carrying that information for 5 years, and it acts on it. The inverse is also documented. Elephants that had positive long-term relationships with specific humans, researchers, caretakers, wildlife workers, showed measurable behavioral changes on re-encounter after multi-year absences. Increased proximity, reduced vigilance, specific greeting behaviors directed at the individual rather than the group. The elephant didn't just remember that humans were sometimes safe. It remembered that you specifically were safe. That distinction between the category and the individual is the line most scientists assumed animals couldn't cross. Elephants cross it easily. Dolphins push the boundary further. In 2013, researchers studying bottlenose dolphins in Sarasota Bay, Florida, one of the longest-running dolphin research programs in the world, documented something that changed how the team thought about their own presence in the water. Individual dolphins showed differentiated responses to specific researchers who had been working with the population for years versus researchers who were new to the program. Not just different responses to familiar versus unfamiliar humans. Specific responses to specific humans. The dolphins weren't running a familiar-unfamiliar binary. They were running a full individual recognition system. Each researcher was a distinct entry with a distinct behavioral response attached. You are a file in a dolphin's memory, if you have ever been in the water with one. Now here is where the science goes somewhere most people aren't prepared for. Individual recognition is not just about memory. It implies something about how animals construct their social world. Because to recognize you as a specific individual, to maintain a model of you that persists across time and updates when you reappear, an animal has to be doing something that looks very much like what psychologists call mental state attribution. The understanding that other individuals have a persistent identity, that you are not just a stimulus that appears and disappears, but a continuous entity that exists even when not present. That the crow that fed with you last Tuesday is the same crow that fed with you 6 months ago and will still be the same crow 6 months from now. That is not a simple recognition system. That is something considerably closer to the way you think about the people in your life. The question this opens, the one the field has been circling carefully for years, is what that recognition actually carries with it. When the crow files you under threatening and passes that file to its offspring, is there something it is like to be the crow that remembers you? When the elephant adjusts its entire behavioral approach to a specific landscape because you are in it, is there an experience of recognition that accompanies that adjustment? Is there something it's like to be an animal that knows who you are? The science cannot answer that yet. What it can tell you is this. Right now, in the world outside your window, there are animals carrying information about you. Specific, accurate, behaviorally active information. Information they retrieved from their own memory or received from another animal that remembered you, and that they are prepared to act on the next time you appear. You have a reputation in the animal world. You have been filed. You have been discussed, in whatever sense animals discuss things, with individuals who have never seen your face. The crow on the wire above your street might know your name isn't in its language, but it knows your face. It knows your pattern. It knows what you did the last time you were close to one of its kind, or what someone who knew you told it you did. You have been known by something that cannot tell you it knows you for longer than you realized, in more places than you thought, by more species than you'd expect. The next time an animal looks at you, really looks at you, holds the eye contact a beat longer than seems necessary, it might not be curiosity. It might be recognition.